the month of May. We can all sing this one.
10 turning points that destroyed David Ruffin's life after the Temptations. 10. That's how many moments it took to destroy a man who once carried the greatest voice in Motown.
Last week my life had meaning.
Before I tell you what happened to David Ruffin, I need to tell you who he was, because the man who sang lead on My Girl deserved a different ending than the one he got.
It's just a fear.
This is the story of 10 decisions, 10 failures, his and others, 10 moments that took him apart, piece by piece, until there was almost nothing left.
My love, that one day I promise.
10. The habit that started quietly. Before there was a scandal, there was a boy from Why Not, Mississippi, a small, unincorporated community, 15 miles from Meridian. David Ruffin was born Davis Eli Ruffin on January 18, 1941, the third son of Elias Ruffin, a Baptist minister, and Ophelia Ruffin, who died during his childbirth. His father raised him inside a gospel group that opened shows for Mahalia Jackson. He left home at 14, intending, at first, to become a minister himself. Instead, he found his way to Memphis talent shows, then to the legendary gospel quartet The Soul Stirrers, then to Detroit at 16, where he met a young label owner named Berry Gordy and helped with construction work on the building that would become Hitsville, USA. His older brother Jimmy was already there, chasing the same dream. Let me be precise about the years that follow. Ruffin joined the Temptations in January of 1964, replacing founding member Al Bryant. Within a year, he was the voice on My Girl, a #1 record. Within 2, he was the voice on Ain't Too Proud to Beg, recorded according to bandmate Otis Williams, with such intensity that Ruffin's glasses were sliding off his face by the end of the take. He's even credited with the idea behind the group's signature four-headed microphone stand. In 2008, Rolling Stone would rank him among the 100 greatest singers of all time.
I've got a sweeter song.
And somewhere inside that same stretch of years, while the hits were climbing, a cocaine habit was climbing with them. Not after the success, during it.
I'm gonna love you, darling, all the time. I don't keep.
Ruffin entered rehabilitation for the first time in 1967, the earliest documented sign that something inside the greatest run of his career was already breaking apart from underneath, hidden behind the biggest records of his life. If My Girl was ever playing in your house growing up, you already know exactly how good this man was before any of what's coming happened to him. That's what makes the rest of this worth saying slowly.
I've got sunshine on a cloudy day with my girl.
The next name on this list is the day the industry stopped protecting him and started replacing him. It came faster than anyone expected. 9. The Firing, June 27, 1968. You know this song, My Girl, has been part of your life for a long time, on the radio, in films, at weddings. But knowing the song and knowing what it cost the man who sang it are two different kinds of knowing. By 1968, David Ruffin wanted what the Supremes had been given, the group's name rebuilt around its lead voice, the way Diana Ross and the Supremes had been rebranded around theirs.
Sympathy, I don't mind, 'cause you mean that
much to me.
He wanted the Temptations renamed David Ruffin and the Temptations. The rest of the group refused.
Ain't your problem, baby.
At the same time, Ruffin was pushing Berry Gordy for a full accounting of the group's earnings. Motown partially agreed, allowing an outside accounting firm to review the books, though that firm was never given complete access through the group's management company, a subsidiary of Motown itself. The friction over money sat on top of friction over his mounting cocaine use, which was already causing him to miss rehearsals and group meetings. Then came one specific night. Ruffin skipped a scheduled engagement at a supper club in Cleveland to instead watch a performance by his girlfriend Barbara, Dean Martin's daughter, at the Latin Casino in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. On June 27, 1968, the Temptations officially fired him. Dennis Edwards took his place within weeks, and the group barely broke stride commercially, a fact that must have made the firing sting even more.
Let you go if I have to beg, plead for.
A man carrying one of the great voices in American music was let go over one missed show, but the missed show was only the excuse. The real case had been building for 2 years. The money, the name, the addiction, all of it. This wasn't neglect. There's a decision on this list that history has looked at less closely than it should have, one that wasn't sudden like this firing. It was calculated, and it came from the label itself. We'll get to it. He didn't disappear quietly. Embittered and feeling the group owed their success to him, Ruffin began showing up at Temptations concerts uninvited, jumping on stage during his old songs to steal the microphone back from Dennis Edwards mid-performance, forcing the group to eventually hire extra security just to keep him out of the building. He was gone from the group that made him famous, and the very next thing that happened almost made you forget he'd ever left it. Real talk. Only 9% of you are subscribed. That hurts. We're spending hours digging through archives, fact-checking every detail, bringing these stories back to life. And if you're watching this far, you clearly care. So hit subscribe. It's free and takes 2 seconds. Now, to my subscribers, barely any of you have joined the membership. And honestly, that stings even more. You know the work we put in. You keep coming back. If these videos have ever made you feel something, if this music means something to you, join the membership. It's $1 coffee a month, and it's the only way we keep this going. Let's build this together. All right, back to it. 8. The peak that arrived too fast. On January 20th, 1969, Motown released My Whole World Ended, The Moment You Left Me, a song written by Johnny Bristol, Harvey Fuqua, Pam Sawyer, and James Roach. Its melody built on Felix Mendelssohn's Frühlingslied, originally intended as a Temptations record. Instead, it became the debut solo single of the man they just fired, produced by Bristol and Fuqua, backed by the originals on vocals and the Funk Brothers in the studio. It reached number 2 on the Billboard R&B chart and number 9 on the Hot 100. The album of the same name, released that May, went to number 1 on the R&B albums chart that year, a commercial vindication delivered within 7 months of his firing. For a moment, it looked like the firing hadn't cost him anything at all. It looked like proof he'd never needed the group in the first place. Let me be clear about what I'm saying, though. This wasn't a comeback. It was a peak. And peaks that arrive this early in a solo career carry a hidden cost because everything that follows gets measured against them and almost nothing ever matches up.
You know more
His second album that same year, Feeling Good, reached only number 9 on the R&B chart, carried mostly by the modest top 20 hit, I'm So Glad I Fell For You. 2 albums, released within months of each other, already telling 2 very different stories about where his career was heading.
Oh, yes, it is, baby.
Talent without sustained investment is just genius with a shrinking window, and the industry that had rushed to prove David Ruffin didn't need the Temptations was already, quietly, moving its attention elsewhere. 7. The comeback that couldn't last.
It's just a feel.
After Feeling Good, David Ruffin all but vanished from the charts. Biographers describe it plainly. He dropped out of the music business for roughly 3 years. Then, in 1975, he delivered Walk Away From Love, a top 10 hit, his biggest single since his 1969 debut, and to this day the only other Ruffin solo record that ever matched that early success. In a solo recording career spanning more than 2 decades and a dozen studio albums, only 2 singles ever reached that height.
Everything I've got to keep walking out the door.
Whether the industry simply stopped building campaigns around him after his first peak, or whether the habits carried over from the Temptations made him harder to invest in, I think you already know which explanation carries more weight.
But those arms you got around me.
This wasn't a man who ran out of talent. It was a man the business kept circling back to only when a hit accidentally arrived, and abandoning again the moment it didn't. Walk Away From Love should have opened a second act. Instead, it became the last real high point of his recording career.
Got a dread that shakes.
What followed was a slower, quieter fade, smaller labels, smaller chart positions, and an industry that increasingly treated him as a name from the past rather than a voice still worth building around, no matter how strong that voice remained in the studio.
Than you ever have before.
And I want to be precise about what this comeback actually proves. It isn't that David Ruffin couldn't still make a hit record in 1975. He did. It's that one hit, 7 years after his firing, was never going to be enough to undo the pattern the industry had already decided was true about him.
Walk away from love.
Once a label stops believing an artist can sustain success, one great single doesn't reverse that belief. It just becomes the exception that gets pointed to later, instead of the beginning of something new. 6. Leaving Motown, 1979 to 1980.
I wish it were you.
By 1979, Ruffin left Motown, the label that had made him and unmade him in equal measure, and signed with Warner Brothers.
Let me breathe. You got to break my heart.
On paper, it looked like a fresh start. Biographers who've studied this era are direct about what it actually was. Not a new beginning, but, in their words, the start of the end.
And let me breathe just a little.
His Warner Brothers records, So Soon We Change in 1980, produced by Don Davis, and Gentleman Ruffin in 1981. Produced a pair of modest results. The title track and the ballad Break My Heart found some airplay, and Gentleman Ruffin included the well-regarded ballad All I Need. Neither album re-established him commercially, and by the early 1980s, his career as a recording artist was, for practical purposes, finished. Not because the voice was gone,
And set me free.
The voice was still there, still capable of the ache that made My Girl what it was. But the industry infrastructure that turns a great voice into a sustained career had quietly stopped being built around him, one label at a time.
I need somebody who's
And I want to be precise about what this departure actually meant for him, because it's easy to hear "left Motown" and assume it was his choice alone, made freely, on his own terms. It wasn't that simple.
set me free. You have to break.
By 1979, Motown had already shelved a completed album of his, already watched his solo output thin out for the better part of a decade, and already shown, repeatedly, where its priorities sat. Leaving wasn't an act of ambition. It was closer to an act of survival, trying to find somewhere, anywhere, still willing to invest in him the way Motown once had, back when My Girl was new. Warner Brothers wasn't that place either. And I'll say clearly what most people won't. An artist doesn't need a label to lose talent. He needs a label to lose belief in him.
I wish it were you.
Motown had already made that decision about David Ruffin once, in 1968. Warner Brothers made it again, more slowly, over the 2 years that followed, and this time, there was no next label waiting to hand him another peak.
Oh, you know it's a long road.
He was 39 years old and running out of doors to knock on.
And let me breathe just a little.
5 jailed for tax evasion.
My love, that one day I promise.
In the early 1980s, while his recording career was stalling out entirely, David Ruffin was convicted of tax evasion and briefly jailed.
You said softly. I didn't have to worry about.
This wasn't the industry doing something to him. This was the accumulated weight of years of chaotic finances, the same unmanaged money that had fueled his 1968 dispute with Berry Gordy over the group's accounting, finally catching up all at once, with no hit record left to cover for it, and no label left willing to smooth it over on his behalf.
Hoping to rise to the top.
And I want to be precise about what this moment actually represents, because it's easy to file it away as a footnote next to the drug arrests. It isn't the same kind of story. The cocaine, the missed shows, the firings, those were failures the industry could see happening in real time, on stages, in front of audiences. The tax case was different. It was quiet. It happened in paperwork, in unpaid returns, in years of a career being managed poorly behind the scenes, while the public still thought of him as the man who once sang My Girl.
That's when you turn around and look me in my eyes and you let me know.
A man who had demanded, back in 1968, a full and transparent accounting of what the Temptations were owed, was now the one whose own finances couldn't survive that same kind of scrutiny.
I'm a common man. You said, David, you don't have.
Some artists give everything to the culture. The culture doesn't always return the favor, and sometimes an artist's own choices make it harder for anyone left in his corner to help. Harder for managers, harder for family, harder for the very label that had already walked away from him twice by this point.
Every common man.
This wasn't the moment David Ruffin lost the industry. He'd already lost that. This was the moment it became clear the industry hadn't just cost him his career, it had left him without the structure a career like his required to survive on his own.
You said softly. I didn't have to worry about.
He walked out of that chapter and, almost immediately, walked back onto the biggest stage he'd stood on in over a decade.
Never cared. If I never changed.
4. The reunion tour and the second firing.
On the top.
In 1982, David Ruffin rejoined the Temptations for a reunion tour and a new album, Reunion, which paired the group with producer Rick James on the modest R&B hit Standing on the Top. For a moment, it looked like history was handing him a second chance at the exact thing that had made him. It did not go well. Ruffin's cocaine addiction caused him to miss show after show. Each missed performance cost the group thousands of dollars in fines, money coming out of the pockets of the same bandmates who'd once fired him for the identical pattern of behavior. Eddie Kendricks, reunited alongside him, was struggling with his own decline, his falsetto weakened by years of smoking. By November of 1982, Otis Williams fired David Ruffin from the Temptations for the second time in his life. The same man, the same addiction, the same outcome, 14 years apart, almost to the pattern. And if this detail is new to you, that he was fired from his own group not once, but twice, that's not something the standard retelling of his story usually includes. Most versions stop at 1968. The truth is, 1968 wasn't the only time this happened to him. It happened again, in front of the same people, for the same reason. And yet the following year, Ruffin and Kendricks still found their way onto a stage at the Apollo Theater with Hall and Oates. Proof that even after the second firing, audiences hadn't given up on him, even when his own bandmates had run out of patience. Three, what Motown did with David. Between 1970 and 1971, David Ruffin recorded a complete studio album for Motown, simply titled David. The label shelved it, not lost it, not delayed it by a few months for marketing. Shelved it indefinitely, a finished body of work by one of the label's most gifted former stars, deliberately kept from ever reaching the public. It would not see release until 2004, 13 years after David Ruffin's death, 33 years after he stood in the studio and recorded it. 33 years, an entire finished album, sitting in a vault, while the man who made it spent the rest of his decade fighting for a level of relevance the label was privately sitting on evidence he'd already earned. And I want to be precise about what makes this different from everything else on this list. The firings, the missed shows, the tax case, those all trace back, at least in part, to David Ruffin's own choices. This one doesn't. This was a business decision made by people who owed him nothing personally, but who had a finished, paid-for recording sitting in their catalog and chose, deliberately, not to let the public hear it. No explanation was ever fully offered. No promotional push was ever attempted and abandoned. It simply stopped existing, on purpose, for over 3 decades. This is the specific example I promised you at the start of this list. Not carelessness, a business choosing to bury completed work rather than release it. Somewhere between the boardroom decision and the eventual 2004 reissue, an entire chapter of David Ruffin's artistic life simply didn't exist for the public that might have kept believing in him at the exact moment he needed them to. And now that you have the full picture, you understand exactly why I said what I said back at the start of this list.
But oh baby, seems like the odds are against me. Let the work touch.
Whether the industry made that decision purely on commercial grounds or as quiet punishment for a man who'd already caused them enough trouble, I think you already know which one feels more honest. Either way, the record exists now. It's just 50 years too late for it to have changed anything for him.
Oh baby, you accepted that decision.
2. Arrested, then cleared, 1988 to 1989.
You go away, and I couldn't believe it.
In 1988, Ruffin was arrested in Detroit for crack cocaine possession. At the time, he told the court he was penniless, living in a friend's mobile home outside the city.
Stay here and stand beside me. It's sad, but
A stunning admission from a man who'd once sung lead on some of the best-selling records in American music. A man whose voice had once been worth more to Motown than almost anyone else's on the roster. He was sentenced to 2 years probation and 50 hours of community service. It wasn't his first brush with the law over the habit. Police records from the era show this was part of a pattern stretching back years, not an isolated lapse. He violated that probation after testing positive for opiates, and a judge ordered him into a drug treatment center rather than back to jail. A small mercy, and an acknowledgement from the system that what he needed wasn't punishment alone.
changes of love that you're running me through makes my heart.
When he emerged in October of 1989, he told the world plainly, "I'm clean." 2 words, but they carried the weight of everything before them. The 1967 rehab stint, the 1968 firing, the 1982 firing, the tax evasion conviction, all of it circling back to the same root cause, finally, publicly addressed.
It's sad, but it's true. If you let me, I know what to do. Oh,
And I want to be precise about what happened next, because the timing here is almost unbelievable. That same year, 1989, the Temptations, Ruffin included, were formally inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland.
to make you see the real side that you're the only one for me.
For a moment, both halves of his story lined up at once. The recognition the industry had been slow to give him, arriving in the exact same year he was, publicly and finally, sober.
But I keep on hoping that you'll catch your notion.
Esther Edwards of Detroit's Motown Historical Museum would later say simply that David was loved as part of the Temptations story, whatever else had happened along the way. Hold this name. You are going to want to remember what comes after it.
You go away, and I couldn't believe it.
1-2 June 1st, 1991.
Because listen, let me tell you.
Love is your direction. If you try
In the spring of 1991, David Ruffin was, by every account around him, thriving.
when you hate the one you love, you ain't satisfied.
He'd just completed a successful month-long tour of England with fellow former Temptations Eddie Kendricks and Dennis Edwards, playing venues on both sides of the Atlantic and earning close to $300,000 between the 3 of them. He was carrying a portion of that money home to Philadelphia to wire to his bandmates. He just recorded a new single, Hurt the One You Love. 2 years after declaring himself clean, he looked, to the people managing his career, like a man with a future in front of him again. His personal manager, Bob Redfield, would later say the group was finally, again, in demand. On the night of May 31st into June 1st, 1991, he relapsed. According to police reports, A friend named Linster Butch Morrell lent Ruffin a limousine, and a man named Donald Brown drove him to a house in West Philadelphia sometime after 10 that evening. Ruffin and another occupant of the house shared roughly 10 vials of crack cocaine in under half an hour, an amount investigators later called an enormous intake even by the standards of the drug. Within 25 minutes, he had collapsed. Brown drove him, unconscious, to the emergency room at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, told staff Ruffin had overdosed, and left immediately. David Ruffin was pronounced dead at 3:55 a.m. He was 50 years old. His death was ruled an accidental cocaine overdose. Here is the detail his family and friends have never been able to let go of. His agent said he'd been carrying tens of thousands of dollars that night, his bandmates' share of the tour earnings, somewhere between $10,000 and $40,000, in a money belt. When he arrived at the hospital, he had $53 in his pockets. The rest was never recovered. Police questioned Brown twice. No one was ever charged. He was buried at Woodlawn Cemetery in Detroit, following a funeral at New Bethel Baptist Church, where the surviving Temptations sang My Girl over his casket, and Aretha Franklin and Stevie Wonder performed in tribute. Even his death didn't end quietly. Years later, his estate sued NBC over a television miniseries that depicted his body being thrown from a moving car and left unclaimed in a morgue for a week, forcing his family to fight, in court, for the basic dignity of how he actually died.